Welcome and thank you for joining us. This is Let's Go Deeper, a weekly podcast stream that offers a refreshing look at the Sabbath School lesson study through engaging conversation between myself, Joel Amenya,
and I, Pastor Inskip Allsup. In this podcast, we seek to distill meaningful insights from each week's lesson that will be both doctrinally sound and practical for your everyday life, as we unearth the great truths embedded in each week's lesson.
So welcome once again to this week's installment of Let's Go Deeper. Give to everyone what you owe them. Pay your taxes and government fees to those who collect them, and give respect and honor to those who are in authority. Owe nothing to anyone except for your obligation to love one another. If you love your neighbor, you fulfill the requirements of God's laws. Romans chapter 13, verse 7 and 8. One thing that happens, Pastor, so often is that I receive mail, and it's not mail that is really specifically for me. It's just generic mail coming from some financial company wanting me to sign up for some credit line. And ever so often I'm tempted to do that because I find myself always running short in terms of the money I need to do the things I want to do. We live in such a society that is really pushing the idea that we need to have so much, and so we need to spend money that we don't have on things we don't need. What does it mean to live in a consumerist society like we live in? How pervasive is borrowing in our society, and how has it impacted us as Christians?
Paul's text in Romans 13 in the New International Version says, "Let no debt remain outstanding except the debt to love one another." So I like that way the New International Version paraphrases that same text. Do not have any debts except the debt to love one another. Do you know, Joel, that one of the curses that God gave Israel, let me read it for you in Deuteronomy chapter 28, 43 to 45. Hear what it says. "The stranger that is within thee shall get up above thee very high, and thou shalt come down very low. He shall lend to thee, and thou shalt not lend to him. He shall be the head, and you shall be the tail. Moreover, all these curses shall come upon thee, and shall pursue thee, and overtake thee, till thou be destroyed, because thou hearkenest not unto the voice of the Lord thy God, to keep his commandments, his statutes, which he commanded thee." Believe it or not, Joel, borrowing, us becoming borrowers was one of the curses God gave to Israel, that you would be a borrower, not a lender. And the blessing side, he said you shall lend and not borrow. So that's the first thing. Borrowing is part of the curse, and we'll understand why later on. Also, the Bible tells us that the unrighteous man borrows and doesn't repay, but the righteous man gives. Check the difference. The unrighteous man borrows and doesn't repay. Does that sound like anybody? You're still owing your credit cards, and you're dodging the calls when they call you, pretending not to be there, not answering your phone because you're still owing. Sometimes you owe someone from church, you borrowed money, I will pay you back as soon as I get my salary. And now you're ducking them in church, you're going to another church, or if you see them, you pretend you didn't see them. That's the sign of an unrighteous man. But unfortunately, Joel, we live in a society that is debt-driven. America is built on debt. And it encourages everyone to be a borrower. And because America influences the world, or somebody says, "Where goes America, goes the world." We see that is in every country now, this sense of a borrower society. And this credit cards, as you mentioned, where they send you tons and tons of invitations, 0% financing, all of this is to make you and to make me borrowers.
And it's very pervasive. And maybe speak to us a bit more about the impact of these borrowing practices, this borrowing phenomenon on a Christian's life.
Yes. Now, Paul says something interesting in 1 Timothy 6:8. He says, having food and clothes, let's be content. In other words, if you have the daily sustain for every day, be content. And Jesus told us to. He said, don't worry about tomorrow. Sufficient for the day is the evil day. Having food and clothes, no need to worry. Paul is echoing the same thing in 1 Timothy 6:8 that Jesus said in Matthew 6. Why? Because in this consumer society, where we are only consuming, give me, buy this, and we end up in debt, there's a sense of covetousness, of lack of satisfaction that is bred in this society.
Yes. Could it be that this, the the systems, the financial powers that be are taking advantage of a deep brokenness within us, the need to just keep amassing more, the greed and covetousness that you're speaking about.
They are appealing to it, they are creating it and nurturing it. For instance, before there was cell phone, nobody felt the need for a cell phone. Now there is not a human being on the planet in our modern society who doesn't feel, if I don't have my cell phone, I'm a lost man. Have you ever left your cell phone at home yet? And that panic that takes you, I gotta have this.
Right.
So they created that desire in us, have this. Who needs a 55-inch screen, flat screen TV? No one needs it. But that desire was created in us to feel like it was a need. Who needs a $200 Nike sneakers with flashing lights? So in this society, a need is created. And that need is not a genuine need, but because of our brokenness, to use your term, that self-centered sense of, if I have more, I am valued more. They appeal to this, but then I don't have the money. I don't have the money to get an iPhone. I don't have the money to get a tablet. I don't have the money to get a TV. I don't have the money to get this. Oh, don't worry. We could lend you the money. It's a credit card. Just charge to your heart's content. So we see in creating the desire and the need by the advertisement and everything they do, they feed it by giving you and giving to me these credit cards. So we are able to feed that hunger to have more, to feel like we are more.
Yes, and you had mentioned the idea that God's intention for us initially was always for us to be the lenders and not the borrowers. Do you feel that, how do you feel about how much this concept of lending, of taking on credit cards has impacted Christians and in itself impacted our call to stewardship?
It has made us slaves to our selfishness, our self-pursuit, slaves to our covetousness, desire to have more, and worse yet, slaves to the lenders. For the lender is master of the borrower. How does this affect my stewardship? Very easily. Because if they're going to come and take back my car, they're going to shut off my cable, and I have just this amount of money, am I going to give it to church? No. I'm going to pay off my debt first because I need my cable, I need my car, I need my phone service on. So it does affect our stewardship in many ways, because now we become a society that spends everything we have. And the exploitation of the borrower by the lender is also criminal. And God had specific rules against that in Israel. He said, if you lend to your brother, do not charge him heavy interest. So don't do it, because he'd cry out to me and I will hear him. So in other words, God was saying, even if I lend to you, I must lend from the goodness of my heart to help you out in a difficult situation, not to exploit your weakness. And in America and in our Western society, and like I said, this is spreading all over the world, the lenders exploit your weakness, exploit your need to get things. And what they do by creating a almost cashless society, you must go through the channels. Have you ever tried to rent a car or even rent a hotel room without a credit card? You can't. There are some transactions you cannot do in this country without having a credit card. And that is deliberate. They want you to borrow. The other thing is, if I'm charging on my card, I don't feel the money as if I'm pulling out cash. Have you ever noticed if you go to buy something and you actually paying cash, you actually feel the amount of money you're giving?
Yeah, the physical form of it.
Yes. And you can say, well, this is $200 I'm giving here. If it's a card, hey, swipe. So the Christian has become a victim
of that disconnection.
Yeah, and I will say sometimes for some of us are even a willing victim of this debt-driven society, this society that is created on credit and debt.
What could almost be seen as a scheme of exploitation.
It is a scheme of exploitation.
Should Christians know better?
That is why we have this lesson. We should know better, but some of us don't. Remember, we are the product of our society. For many of us, this is what we learned. If you need something, get a credit card, take it out on credit, buy it, pay later. So borrowing is actually leveraging my future for present pleasure.
It's not delaying your gratification. It's just wanting things now, here, today, instantly.
Yes, instant gratification. And borrowing allows instant gratification to grow. When I was growing up, most people saved for what they wanted. So if you wanted to buy a new bed, a new refrigerator, whatever, you saved. You may join a susu. I think in Africa there's something like that where people get together and they all punch your money.
Yes, a little club, a little grouping of people.
And you waited maybe 2 months, 3 months, 4 months, 6 months, a year. But then you bought it and it was yours. Today's society says, why wait till a year? Get it now and pay later. And so in a very real sense then, we have become the pawns of a society that exploits us.
Yeah, and I wanted also now to maybe look at the Bible and some of the examples there, because one of the most prominent examples is that of Esau giving away his birthright for what was immediate.
Yes.
How do we process that story and see how taking on credit and just sort of auctioning your future in a way can end up making you lose out on a greater blessing that God will have prepared for you?
To answer that, let me go to an experiment that was done in the 1960s at Stanford University by a Professor Walter Mischel. It's called the marshmallow experiment.
Very famous.
Right. As you know, the researcher went into a room with children, said, I can give you a marshmallow, but I need to leave the room. Oh, don't eat it. If you don't eat it, when I come back, I'll bring another one and you'll have two instead of one. And they did this with many children. Interesting thing is that some children, as soon as the researcher turned his back and went out the room, they ate the marshmallow. Other children, they bounced around, they scratched their head, they looked, and finally they gave in to the temptation and ate the marshmallow. And the other group were those children who for some reason were able to hold on and not eat marshmallow. What that meant is that those who ate the marshmallow robbed themselves of having two instead of one because they couldn't wait. Interesting thing though, Joel, is that when they followed up these children years later, as teenagers in high school and as adults, do you know what they found out? Children who were able to delay gratification, who did not eat the marshmallow, had better quality lives. They had better SAT scores. They were less likely to be drug addicts or to use substances. They had better careers. And even when they checked these people back in their 40s, had better family lives. They were much more fulfilled in life because they had learned to delay gratification. So when we look at Esau, we see a situation where here's a man giving up his birthright, which meant receiving double the blessing his father have, receiving the authority to be head over his father's inheritance when his father died for one meal. Now you may say he was hungry, and I know he was hungry. He came home from hunting, he was really hungry. He wasn't dying. I'm sure he could have survived another hour or two. In that moment, all that he felt was, I'm hungry, I need to eat. He said, what good would a birthright do me so many years in the future? I need to eat now. Esau later on wanted to get the birthright back, and he couldn't, and he lamented with tears, the Bible says, seeking it, but he couldn't. A decision made in a moment of instant gratification, of just satisfying the emotional need, the present need, without considering it on a scale. How important is this now as to what I will receive if I hold out? So in Esau, we see what happens when we are not able to delay gratification. And in the many Americans, including Christians, who are burdened with debt, who are scrambling to get out of debt, we see what happens when you cannot delay gratification. Hold off on purchasing that TV. Hold off on purchasing that BMW. Hold off on purchasing that something. Even the housing bubble that burst. Again, we see that instant gratification. I want it now. And because the way is open for me to get it now, I don't even think about what will this mean for me in the future.
Wow. And that famous marshmallow test is a testament to really how much we are impacted by our desire to be instantly gratified. So as a Christian, what are some of the things that are stewardship founded that should motivate us to want to not want to be gratified immediately, to hold out into the future? What are some of the things that should ground us to have that confidence that we can forego some things because of who we are in Jesus?
Well, for one thing, the contentment principle. If you have food and clothes and shelter, be content with that. Secondly, not to tie our value, the value for life, the things we possess. A friend of mine and I were in New York once, and he had one of those older cell phones. You remember when those cell phones looked like a big...
A block.
Yes. So it was a good phone. He took it out to call, and somebody saw the phone and started to laugh. Say, man, can you pass that landline for me? And they started to make a lot of jokes. From the time he got back home, he went and he bought a slim Jim. Back those days were the slim phones, because I don't want people to laugh at me. That attitude that I need to measure up to others, what society says I should have, is also driving us. As a Christian, we need to know our identity is in Christ, not in the things we possess. And we will not be driven by desire for prestige in what we get. So we have contentment. If I have enough to sustain me now, let me do so. Also, I'm not going to follow the world's sense of my value is attached to what I have, and I need to measure up to others. If my car is working well, taking me from point A to point B in relative comfort, then why should I trust myself to get a BMW or a 2018? The third thing is to live within my means, to practice living within my means. That means, therefore, I will have a budget. And I wonder how many people have a budget, Joel. Have you ever considered how many of us have a household budget that we stick to?
I will imagine very few, because it so seems that we are all moving and just acting as a reactionary way as things happen.
And you are a more financial person, Joel. I think you work in a bank and everything. What does a budget do for us, really?
I think a budget, first of all, gives you a good sense of how much you have, the extent of what you own. And it also gives you, it helps you build priority.
Yes.
So that you're able to know which things need to be attended to immediately and which things you can hold back on. And a budget ultimately makes you distribute or use your funds in a way that is more prudent.
Right. In other words, if you were to summarize all those things you said, it helps you to live within your means.
Correct.
It's happened to me. I get some money and I put, let's say, $100 in my pocket, and I buy something for $5 here, something for $2 there, and I'm thinking, I have $100. And then I dip thinking I have $30, $40 and realize, oh, come on, I only have $5. Something is wrong with it. And I'm frantic. And then a voice says, okay, and skip calm. Just run back in your mind and you say, wait, $1 plus 5 plus 15 there plus. And you realize you spent your money without even realizing it. So a budget allows me to see what is going out as opposed to what has come in. Mm-hmm. So I live within my means. Any Christian who wants to delay gratification and avoid debt has to have a budget and stick to it, a realistic budget, and stick to it, because a budget helps you to live within your means. Needless to say, we also need the Holy Spirit to give us self-control. The key to delaying gratification is self-control, self-discipline, which is one of the fruit of the Spirit. Incidentally, let me do a plug here for parents. Parents, your children's future as Christians, as useful citizens of the land, will depend on your ability, your diligence in teaching them delayed gratification and self-control in their youth. And you as a parent, give your child every new toy that comes out. Give your child whatever they want to eat. When you allow your children to get every brand new toy, you are teaching them instant gratification. You are teaching them to just give in to just what they want. Parents, your children's future, even as Christians, will depend on what you do now. So I'm appealing to parents. Teach children from the earliest age how to delay gratification, how to develop self-control, because people who have developed self-control have happier lives, have more productive lives, have greater spiritual lives.
Yes, and that's really what the marshmallow test proved to us, that if you're able to train your child early enough, that the future has some guarantee built into it. So Pastor, help us now also look at the story of Joseph, because I think in it we learn the positive side of how, delayed gratification actually bears fruit.
Actually, when we look at Esau, we see someone who has no self-control, no self-discipline, who will not delay gratification, and the lamentable decisions he has made. It is like that person who doesn't weigh their choice of a spouse, of a job, of all these different things. So we see the shipwreck you can make of your life, your material life, your social life, and especially your spiritual life. In Joseph, we see the opposite. Someone who knew that principle must guide me in all I do. Even when he refused Potiphar's wife, he could have done it thinking, well, she's lonely, there's nobody else here. She's the master's wife. If she likes me, things are even going to be better with me. Why not enjoy this pleasure right now? He was a young man with all the needs of any young man, but he knew there was a greater principle, and he denied that. He ended up in jail, and even while he was in prison, he didn't give up the righteous principles by which he lived, because he knew somehow God would rescue him. God would turn it all around. And so he didn't just give up. He kept sticking to righteousness. That's a lesson too. You may be doing all that is right, being diligent in your expenditure, being diligent in managing your debt, and find others seem to be blossoming while you can't. Stick with it. God has a plan, and as you follow righteous principle, it will blossom one day. But the great thing about Joseph is what he taught Pharaoh. I call it the Joseph principle. That is, in times of plenty, not spend all, but put aside for times of scarcity. Many of us don't do that. In times of plenty, manage your resources in such a way that there is something left over for times of scarcity, because plenty doesn't last forever. Good times don't last forever. Therefore, when Joseph came to interpret Pharaoh's dream. Remember the dream with the 7 fat cows and the 7 fat ears of grain, and then the 7 lean cows and the 7 blighted grain. Joseph said there would be 7 years of plenty, followed by 7 years of famine. And then he told Pharaoh, do this. Store up in your barns during the years of plenty. Just keep storing up, so that when the years of famine come, there will be grain in Egypt. And the Bible says in Genesis chapter 41:33 onward, Pharaoh said, this is a great principle. You are the best man to do this. And Joseph began a very astute principle of storing up grain. The Bible says after a while, they lost count of how much they had. But in the 7 years of famine, that store, emergency fund, if you want to call it, bailed out Egypt and many other nations. I wish our president, I wish our financial people in America would read the Bible and follow the Joseph principle. I wish most of these big corporations would follow the Joseph principle and not abuse money in the time. So what I'm saying is this. You are a young man now, Joel. You're working every month. You're going to get your salary, etc. But there's a day when you will not be able to work. You'll be too old. You have to retire. Your company can win a piece of a ship. Then what happens then if you have just spent everything? So another great principle to avoid debt is that as you are working, there's a savings. Put money away for that lean times. Money that when you need something, you could say, I've got the money to put an engine in my car. I've got this money to buy this because I need this. I've been saving.
Yeah, and those are practices that take time to build. And I think, we have to be aware that we have to get into the habit so that habit can actually become part of our natural tendency. So, Pastor, is it easy to say no to debt?
It isn't. Not in a debt-driven society like America is, and a consumeristic society like America is. Very difficult for us to stay away from debt. Maybe even impossible when you think about it, but there's a way around it. That is, if you have a credit card, and I've been trying to practice this in my own life, only charge things for which you have cash for. So you're building credit that you need to rent a car, to rent a hotel room, maybe to buy a vehicle, buy a house, whatever have you. But you only charge those things that you have the money for. So when your bill comes, you can just simply pay it off and not go beyond that. That's one way to kind of move around this debt society. Acknowledge that this society wants you to be in debt. They want you to charge things. They want you to have a balance on your credit card, so to speak. And they're doing everything to lead you there. Work with it, but recognizing I can offshoot it by making sure that whatever I charge on my credit card, let's say, I have monies and funds to stand behind it.
And for us, for my family in particular, I think one of the great things we did is about 2 years ago, we went for a 10-week program, just training us on budgeting, on how to work to work through our funds, on how to save, on how to manage our resources. And during that course, I think one of the things that we really learned is that we never quite saw the extent our responsibility until that was laid out, and we realized, there's so much we needed to consider even as we made financial decisions that maybe, when you're not consciously planning out and budgeting, you never put those things into consideration.
In other words, if I'm hearing you clearly, Joel, you're saying churches or individual, if their churches isn't doing it, should look out for one of these financial planning classes.
Yes, and
like Dave Ramsey or these things.
Exactly. Dave Ramsey was very helpful, and I think he's now doing these projects even with churches all over the country. Very, very important program, and I think it really opened my eyes and made me appreciate the effectiveness of budgeting. And I can tell you there's been a significant difference in how the funds move within my home ever since we went through that program with my wife.
It's so good to hear, and I'm hoping our listeners will recognize that investment in like Dave Ramsey's program or any meaningful budgeting program or financial planning program will well be worth it in cutting our debt, saving us from debt. Because debt is not immoral. You're not breaking a commandment per se, yet it has moral implications and spiritual implications. Because debt is a choice I make. And that choice is fueled by my self-control, my contentment, my satisfaction, or my covetousness and my envy. That decision is also fueled by my studying the Word of God and recognizing that God has promised in Deuteronomy 28:12, He says, I will open the heavens and I will give you rain in your season and bless your work, so you shall not borrow. Wow, God is telling His children, you shall not borrow. That is a promise for us today. You shall not borrow. You shall not find yourself the slave of the lenders, because truly, when you see, have you ever checked the interest rate on a credit card? The kind of high APR, And if you only paid the minimum amount, which they want you to pay the minimum amount, you will never pay off your debt. And if you miss one payment, I was so surprised. You missed one payment and they raise up your APR. The point is this: the borrower is slave to the lender. And in a society like ours that is exploitative, corrupt, self-serving, wealth-seeking, and
materialistic,
and hoarding and materialistic, the lender will never lend you because he loves you. So when you get that invitation, 0% APR, transfer your balance to a card, and they don't care about you. They don't love you. They're doing this to exploit you. Recognizing that alone would help. In fact, when I see these letters come, I just tear it up. If I didn't ask for it, I don't want it. I simply tear them up. I don't even look at what they want because I know there's nothing in there that's going to benefit me. It's for them.
So maybe, Pastor Evan, as we close this, let's reiterate how debt affects our stewardship one more time.
Debt affects my stewardship by, number one, feeding my instant gratification, my covetousness, my lack of satisfaction, because I can get it. In the good old days, if you didn't have it, you just didn't have it. You waited till you could buy it. You saved until you could buy it. In this society, it says, why should I have to wait? I went to buy a phone, and they were trying to entice me with all kinds of offers to get the Samsung 8 and 8 Plus or something like that, which was about $900 or more. There was another phone that I thought was just as useful that would cost me $200. Well, guess what? I decided, yes, it would be nice to have all the bells and whistles, but I asked myself the question, how many of these bells and whistles do I ever use on my cell phone? I don't. So I use the simpler phone, but it's a prestigious thing to pull out an iPhone 8 and this and that kind of stuff. So therefore, it feeds my materialism. And ultimately, when I'm burdened with death, I fall into now the cares of this life. How am I going to pay? Then my integrity is questioned. I am no longer a good steward of my integrity and my character because now I have to dodge the creditors, I have to lie. I have to avoid my friends who I borrowed from, and then that affects my ability to give. Because now all my money is spent in trying to pay off all of these debts. I can't lend somebody. I can't give to someone. I can't give to the church. I can't give to the poor because I'm paying off these debts that have me choking. So it does affect my stewardship in many ways. My health is affected because I'm stressed. Anxiety is affecting my health and my well-being. Now I have to use my time trying to probably double up on my work to see if I can make some more money to pay off these debts. It's just a cascading of effects in my stewardship and my overall quality of life. And that is why God told his people, you will not borrow, because remember this, the borrower, slave, the lender. Therefore, God didn't want his people to be the tail. He wanted them to be the head. Even though we live in a debt-ridden society, a debt-driven society in which America says, and most of the world say, you must borrow, you must have credit. We can't avoid that. We can get around it by managing ourselves, having a budget, and staying within our means and saving up for times when there is scarcity. But one quick thing before we close. You may say, well, okay, God, I shouldn't borrow, but can I lend? That's a tricky question. And I would like to say the Christian should be careful in lending or signing guarantor for someone else. The Bible says it's a fool who signs his name on somebody else's debt. Guess what? If you do lend as one who is giving, not as one who expects to have that returned, to be repaid, thank you, or who wants interest. And I will say this much. If you need that money urgently, don't lend it. Unless you can turn your back away from that money, don't lend it. So a brother comes and say, man, I'm in a tight situation. I need $300 to pay my rent, or I need $500, whatever it is. At that moment, maybe you have $500 for rent, for your own rent. Or maybe it's $500 to pay your child's school fee. And he said, I promise you, when I get my check next Tuesday, I'll give it back to you. And you think, well, I could give it to him and I could hold out till next Tuesday. Don't. Do you know why? Because when he can't repay you next Tuesday, the relationship is going to be affected. Now, you're angry. You're upset because you are now in debt. You now have to find money that you had to do what God gave you to do. He doesn't have the money. He's hiding from you, and the friendship is destroyed. So if ever as a Christian, you decide to lend to another Christian, lend as one who doesn't expect to be repaid. Be sure you can do without that money, because 9 times out of 10, that person cannot and will not pay you back when they told you, and then you would be in a bad situation. So while you shouldn't borrow, be careful in lending, because you can find yourself in a similar situation.
Thank you very much, Pastor.
And so, Father, teach us not to get caught up in this debt-driven society, always seeking that new thing and taking things on credit, because we can charge it. But let us budget our finances as responsible stewards and stay out of debt, or we shall be slaves to no one but to Jesus Christ, from whom we owe all things. Amen.
Amen. We are glad you were able to join us for this episode of Let's Go Deeper. We would love to hear from you. Please send us your feedback or questions to letusgodeeper@gmail.com. That is letusgodeeper@gmail.com. Or you can leave us a voicemail on phone number 302-440-4068. You can also find us on Twitter at Let Us Go Deeper. This podcast is available on the iTunes Store, Play Music on your Android, SoundCloud, or wherever you stream your podcasts. Please check back every Sunday for a new episode of Let's Go Deeper.